Biology, fields of study, and branches of biology. Biology is the study of life from many different standpoints. But because there are so many different ways to study life, there are a lot of branches derived from biology, like anatomy, the study of the structure of organisms and their parts; anthropology, the study of what makes us human; botany, the study of plants; biomedicine, the clinical medicine based on the principles of physiology and biochemistry; biochemistry, the study of the chemical substances and processes that occur in plants, animals, and microorganisms, and the changes that they undergo during development and life; cytology, the study of cells; genetics, the study of genes; histology, the study of microanatomy of cells, tissues, and organs as seen through a microscope; immunology, the study of immunity; virology, the study of viruses; zoology, the study of members of the animal kingdom; and astrobiology, a newer branch of biology that studies the life in the universe. These are just some of them because there are so many of the branches of biology. How life started on the planet. So, for through history, there have been a lot of theories about how life started on the planet, but there has never been a satisfactory one. So, for example, a long time ago, it was believed that a higher being created life on Earth spontaneously. But then knowledge progressed, and there were new explanations like that the electrical activity in the atmosphere created life, or that it was created in a volcano or at the bottom of the sea, or that it was brought to Earth through comets and meteorites. But everything that previously happened gave rise to a system based on DNA and RNA that are capable of storing information in order to create molecules and edit their modifications. This way, it was able to be transcribed and translated and replicated.
Okay, so biology is about living things. So we're gonna talk about what are the characteristics that something has to fulfill in order to be considered a living thing. And well, these are 8 characteristics, and the first one is organization, which means that they have a complex inner organization with molecules, atoms, proteins, cells, organelles, organs, flesh, and which forms the living thing. Then we have genetic code, which is DNA and RNA that are sequence of bases that together have all the genetic information of the being. Then response to stimuli. They must respond in a way to any inner or outer stimuli. Next, we have homeostasis. We're going to talk about it in a moment later, but a brief explanation is the capacity of keeping balance to stay in healthy conditions. Then metabolism, which is the obtain and use of energy. Then growth, which is quite simple, it just increase of the volume on the living thing. Reproduction, which may be sexual or asexual, which is reproducing themselves in order to perpetuate their species. And adaptation and evolution, which is that through generations they change and adapt to their environment. Now we're going to talk about the types of cells. And there are 2 main types of cells, which are eukaryotic and prokaryotic. The main difference is that eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus, while prokaryotic do not have. Then, as we can see, eukaryotic cells are way more complex than prokaryotic ones. The prokaryotics have all the genetic material on the cytoplasm and are always unicellular. And eukaryotic may be multicellular and are divided in animal cell and plant cell. In the next slide, we have an image which helps us to compare, like in the eukaryotic side, we see more parts and it's more complex, and the prokaryotic is just capsule, ribosomes, cell wall, membrane, DNA, and cytoplasm. It's like way more simple.
The microscope. The microscope is an optical instrument used for viewing very small objects, such as mineral samples or animal or plant cells, typically magnified several hundred times. The history of the microscope. The observation of the world of tiny things began with the invention of the magnifying lenses. They combine more than one magnifying glass to see objects, and show them in increased sizes. The first primitive microscope was not made until the late 1300s as a magnifying tube. Who invented the microscope? We don't know the answer to this question, but there are several theories. Like, for example, Zachariah Janssen, um, evidence points him as the most likely inventor of the microscope. Galileo Galilei is also a person that is suspected to have created it, but we know that in 1609 he perfected the first microscope. Giovanni Faber, he was the first person to name this invention as a microscope in 1625. Robert Hooke discovered the cells in 1665, which was a very huge impact on biology. The cell. History of the cell. Robert Hooke in 1665 published the observations he made with the microscope. Leeuwenhoek observed and described with more detail cells like the protozoa and spermatozoa. Theodor Schwann in 1830 proposed the first postulate of the cell theory. Rudolf Virchow proposed that all cells come from a pre-existing one in 1885. Lee Margulis proposed the endosymbiotic theory in 1981. The cell theory. The postulate of the cell theory affirmed that the cell is the morphological and structural unit of all living things. In other words, all living things are made up from cells. Every cell comes from another cell. 3. All vital functions take place within the cell, and only one is enough to generate life. 4. The cell contains the hereditary information for the control of its development, growth, reproduction, and to transmit the information to the next generation. 5. The disease begins with the cell.
Cellular transport. What is cellular transport? A cellular transport is a process in which everything that enters or leaves a cell has to pass through the cell membrane. There are many forms that a cellular transport can be performed. There's the active transport. This transport spends energy and goes against gradients of concentration. An example of this kind of transport is the sodium-potassium pump AT-PACE that is shown in the next picture. Is represented by the activity of the pump that removes 3 molecules of sodium and puts 2 molecules of potassium. This transport is against a concentration gradient, which is why it spends energy. There's the passive transport. The passive transport does not waste energy and goes in favor of concentration gradient. It can be simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and ultrafiltration or dialysis. In the simple diffusion, the molecules cross the lipid bilayer. Gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen pass through it freely. However, other small polar molecules with no electrical charge, such as water, can pass through the membrane only in small proportions. In the facilitated diffusion, the passage of molecules depends on the presence of the integral membrane proteins that allow this passage. These proteins can form channels or complex transporters. In the ultrafiltration or dialysis, water in some solutes pass through a membrane as a result of hydrostatic pressure. The flow is always from higher to lower pressure in the case of glomerular filtration in the kidneys to form urine. There's the endocytes transport, in where is the incorporation of material into the cell. Pinocytosis is a concept that is comparable with the drinking of the cell, since the cell incorporates molecules in suspension. Phagocytosis is a process that is comparable with the eating of the cell, because through it the cell incorporates large quantities of materials and even whole cells. Receiver-mediated endocytosis. In the cell membrane, there are receptors to which specific molecules bind, which are then incorporated into the cytoplasm. Exocytosis transport is the secretion of the material produced by cells. There's the regulated. In this case, the cell responds to a signal to release its products, and the constitutive is where the secretion is constant. The components or saliva are an example of this. The oral cavity is never completely dry. That means that the salivary glands function constitutively.
Now let's talk about levels of organization. The living things are highly organized and structured, following a hierarchy that can be examined on a scale from small to large. The atom is the smallest and most fundamental unit of matter. It consists of a nucleus surrounded by electrons. Atoms form molecules. A molecule is a chemical structure consisting of at least 2 atoms, held together by one or more chemical bonds. Organelles are small structures that exist within cells. Examples of organelles include the mitochondria and chloroplast. which carry out indispensable functions. The cell itself is the smallest fundamental unit of structure and function in living organisms. Cells are classified as prokaryote and eukaryote. In larger organisms, cells combine to make tissues, which are groups of similar cells, carrying out similar or related functions. The organs are collections of tissues grouped together, performing a common function. Organs are present not only in animals, but also in plants. An organ system is a higher level of organization that consists of functionally related to organs. The organisms are individual living entities. For example, each tree in a forest is an organism. All the individuals of a species living within a specific area are collectively called a population. A community is the sum of population inhabiting a particular area. An ecosystem consists of all the living things in a particular area together, with the abiotic, non-living parts of the environment such as nitrogen in the soil or rainwater. Finally, at the highest level of organization, the biosphere is the collection of all ecosystems and it represents the zone of life on Earth. It includes land, water, and even the atmosphere to a certain extent.
Now we will talk about homeostasis. Homeostasis is an important trait of living beings. It involves adapting in response to external stimuli by maintaining a stable internal environment even if it costs energy. This is done by several mechanisms in the body that allows it to sense, organize, and react to the stimuli in order to keep the body in ideal conditions. In the bottom left images, we can see the diagram of the process, and an example of homeostasis when the body temperature reaches 37 degrees. There are two types of homeostasis. Both of them seek to maintain a balance in the body, but they do it through different methods. The first type is a negative feedback loop. This type of homeostasis is the most often associated with the term homeostasis, as it involves a bodily response to counteract external changes or stimuli. For example, in response to cold weather, our body shakes to generate heat. The second one is a positive feedback loop. Positive feedback loops actually amplify the stimuli that causes the loop. This might seem counterproductive, but it becomes clear with the following example. When birth begins, the head of the body pushes against the uterus. This causes an immediate response, where this stimulus causes the body to release oxytocin, which causes the baby to push against the uterus even more. This process will continue until the baby is completely out of the womb. In this way, the body maintains its balance, as a mother obviously cannot keep the baby in her stomach indefinitely. Organ systems are a series of organs that work together in order to perform a specific task that is vital for our survival and reproduction. Humans have about 12 of them, all of which are listed below. The reason why we need so many systems to stay alive is because of our complexity. For example, our bodies have over 30 trillion cells, all of which need oxygen to keep us alive. Since most of our cells aren't exposed to the environment, we need systems to collect and transfer that oxygen to all 30 trillion cells in our bodies. As one can imagine, that is a very difficult task, and that is just one example of our needs.
Health and disease. Everything in our bodies finally regulated by mechanisms that allow us to maintain homeostasis and therefore health. Since a human being is born and with the passage of time, he perceives a series of changes in his body, emotions, and social needs. We have tried to define and classify those changes in order to face them and give them an answer in our daily life. From there, the definitions of health and disease result. Health. From a physical perspective, health is an implicit right. It seeks to satisfy the needs to create conditions for health through proper nutrition, prevention of diseases, and environmental sanitation. Currently, health is affected by industrialization, automation, and naturalization of the pace of life. The human being becomes the leading actor and the main responsible in regards of his health. The factors that affect health are 20% genetics, 20% environment, 10% public health, and 50% lifestyles. The World Health Organization, who defines health, is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. This definition does not only consider health as physical well-being, but a person to be considered healthy, this person must be health in the physical and social aspects. That is, the person must integrate his emotions and feelings with his family, friends. Disease. On the 5th century before Christ, people thought that hell and disease was adjunct to God's work. Over time, this reasoning lost its validity. People understood that disease does not have a magical explanation, nor evil positions cause it, nor it had to do with a divine punishments. It is possible to identify all illness when the symptoms of a process appear and break the balance of the organism, which can lead to minor health and in some occasions the loss of life. Health in adolescence. Adolescence is a stage that is characterized by the transition between childhood and adulthood, which implies physical, cognitive, and physiological changes. In general terms, adolescents are considered healthy people because physically their body has the strength to resist diseases even better than young children and older adults. However, the adolescent sees himself in the middle of many changes that affect him in a significant way. These changes are physical, psychological, and social. Physical changes, hormonal changes. With them brings the increase of the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which favors the rise of luteinizing and follicle stimulant. The adrenal gland begins to secrete high levels of androgens, which influence the growth of pubic, armpit, and facial hair, as well as the physical growth and the increase in the amount of fat in the skin caused body odor. Social perspective. The adolescent has the ability to produce more complex reasoning about social issues such as morality and develops altruism and empathy because he can consider the opinion, ideas of other people in solving problems, especially social issues, than when he was a child. Mental health. In adolescence, the brain is still developing. It is estimated that this development culminates approximately at the age of 21 years old. Younger adolescents tend to use more amygdala, which is related to emotional and instinctive reactions. The underdevelopment of the brain at this stage helps explain looking for exciting emotions and novelties. This incites the young person to have aggressive behaviors, to consume substances, to face dangers, among other risky behaviors. Healthy lifestyles. Lifestyles are the most significant factor in the maintenance of health or the onset of the disease. Lifestyles are related to social and cultural behaviors, pertain to diverse groups, including social classes and national groups. They are related to personal habits. According to epidemiology, lifestyles are the behaviors of individual nature that are linked to chronic diseases and are related to the perception of risk factor. Behaviors that can lead to the health are sleep between 7 and 8 hours a day, have breakfast every day, perform 2 meals a day, maintain body weight within acceptable limits, practice a physical activity regularly, do not consume or moderate the consumption of alcohol, and no smoking. Avoiding or managing risk factors as well as avoiding risky behaviors are strategies that health managers should promote as prevention measures. Each person is responsible for their physical, emotional, and social health, with reservation of the variables that cannot be controlled.
Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day.